Lawrence Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Technologies, watches in stunned silence as 4 flight attendants simultaneously radio for security while passengers in first class stare. His $15,000 ticket suddenly worthless. "Sir, we need verification," they insist, despite his boarding pass clearly displaying Zone 1. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling. Let's see how this disturbing situation unfolds and what surprising turn of events awaits Lawrence Mitchell. Lawrence Mitchell stood in the VIP lounge of LAX, sipping his sparkling water while reviewing merger documents one final time. At 45, he had built Mitchell Technologies from a small startup into a Fortune 500 powerhouse worth billions. Today's transcontinental flight to New York carried enormous stakes. The merger meeting tomorrow could double the company's market value overnight. He adjusted his cashmere sweater and checked his Patek Philippe watch, a quiet symbol of success he'd promised himself after his first million. Lawrence had learned to dress in the careful middle ground required of black executives, professional enough to be taken seriously, but not flashy enough to trigger stereotypes. His leather briefcase contained the future of 7,000 employees who depended on his leadership. Final boarding call for premium passengers on Flight 1857 to JFK, the announcement echoed through the lounge. Lawrence gathered his belongings, nodding politely to the lounge attendant who had been courteous throughout his 2-hour stay. As he walked toward the gate, Lawrence noticed the subtle shift in energy that had become familiar over his 20-year career. A white woman clutched her purse tighter as he passed. A security guard watched him with slightly more attention than the executives around him. Small things. Tiny paper cuts that accumulated over a lifetime. Just part of the tax, he muttered to himself, repeating his father's phrase for the extra burden carried by successful black Americans. The gate area bustled with activity as Lawrence approached with his first-class boarding pass. The digital screen displayed, "Now boarding. Zone 1" in bright letters. He stepped into the priority line, standing behind an older white couple who chatted excitedly about their upcoming Broadway shows in Manhattan. "Good afternoon," the gate agent Betty said warmly to the couple, scanning their tickets with a smile. "Enjoy your flight." When Lawrence stepped forward, Betty's smile remained fixed, but something changed in her eyes as she actually looked at him. "Boarding pass, please," she said, her tone noticeably cooler. Lawrence handed over his digital boarding pass. Betty frowned at the screen, then looked back at Lawrence. She checked the pass again, then a third time. "Is there a problem?" Lawrence asked, keeping his voice measured and professional. "Just one moment, sir," Betty replied, tapping furiously on her keyboard. Lawrence noticed passengers behind him growing restless. "My boarding pass clearly shows Zone 1, Lawrence said quietly. "I'm in seat 2A. Betty picked up her phone without responding. "Charles, I need you at gate 37. Possible ticket issue." She hung up and turned to Lawrence. "If you could just step aside for a moment, sir. We need to verify something." Lawrence remained calm, though his heart rate accelerated slightly. He'd been here before. He glanced back at the priority line, where 3 more white passengers had been quickly processed without additional verification. "What specifically needs verification?" Lawrence asked, maintaining his composure. "I'm the CEO of Mitchell Technologies, and I'm late for an important meeting in New York." Betty's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sir, please step aside. Our supervisor will assist you shortly." Charles arrived moments later, a balding man with an air of authority in his airline uniform. Betty leaned over, whispering something Lawrence couldn't hear, occasionally glancing in his direction. Charles approached with a practiced customer service smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon, sir. I understand there's some confusion with your boarding pass." Lawrence took a slow, deep breath. This familiar dance had played out countless times throughout his career. "Stay calm. Stay professional. don't confirm their biases. There's no confusion on my end, Lawrence replied evenly. I have a valid first-class ticket for this flight. Charles took Lawrence's boarding pass, holding it at arm's length as though inspecting a potentially counterfeit bill. His exaggerated scrutiny drew attention from nearby passengers, several of whom slowed their pace to observe the unfolding situation. This is a first-class boarding pass, Charles stated, the implication in his tone clear. It didn't belong to someone like Lawrence. Yes, it is, Lawrence confirmed. As I mentioned to your colleague, I'm Lawrence Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Technologies. We're a Fortune 500 company, and I'm traveling to New York for a critical business meeting. Charles gave a dismissive smile. Sir, anyone can claim to be a CEO. We have protocols for ticket verification when something seems unusual. Unusual? Lawrence repeated, keeping his voice steady despite the rising heat in his chest. What exactly is unusual about my valid first-class ticket? By now, a small crowd had gathered. Lawrence noticed a young woman with her phone raised, recording the interaction. Another passenger muttered something about holding up the line. Sir, perhaps you misunderstood the boarding groups, Charles suggested, his condescending tone making Lawrence's jaw tighten. Maybe you should wait for your appropriate boarding group. My appropriate boarding group is Zone 1, as clearly indicated on my boarding pass, Lawrence responded, his patience wearing thin but his exterior remaining professional. I'd appreciate if you would allow me to board now, as I have a right to do. Charles made a subtle hand gesture, and suddenly two more airline staff appeared, creating a human barrier between Lawrence and the jet bridge. A flight attendant named Melissa emerged from the aircraft, quickly joining the growing wall of personnel. What's the issue here? She asked, not to Lawrence, but to Charles. Possible fraudulent boarding pass, Charles replied, not bothering to lower his voice. Lawrence felt a flash of indignation. There is absolutely nothing fraudulent about my ticket. I purchased it through my corporate account 3 weeks ago. He reached for his wallet. I'm happy to show you my ID and corporate credentials. As Lawrence produced his driver's license and company ID card, Charles took a half-step backward, his hand moving to the radio clip to his belt. In that moment, Lawrence recognized the dangerous territory he was entering, a black man perceived as becoming aggressive in an airport. Sir, keep your hands where we can see them, Charles said loudly, his finger now pressing the radio button. In a synchronized move that would have been impressive if it weren't so alarming, all 4 staff members activated their radios simultaneously. Security to gate 37, possible situation with passenger, Charles spoke into his device, his eyes never leaving Lawrence. Lawrence slowly returned his ID to his wallet, acutely aware of how the scene might appear to onlookers. He'd read too many stories of situations like this escalating tragically for black men. I'm simply trying to board a flight for which I have a valid ticket, Lawrence said, fighting to keep his voice steady. He pulled out his phone. Look, here's the Mitchell Technologies website with my photo. I can show you our company's recent press releases. The staff ignored his phone screen. Behind them, through the jet bridge window, Lawrence could see first-class passengers already seated, staring curiously at the commotion. Security is on their way, Melissa announced, her hand still on her radio. Sir, please step back from the boarding area. For the first time since the confrontation began, Lawrence felt a crack in his carefully maintained composure. A lifetime of similar moments. Being followed in stores, questioned in hotel lobbies, asked if he was in the right neighborhood, came rushing back. But this time, it was happening in public, with an audience, with his dignity and potentially his safety at stake. This is humiliating and unnecessary, Lawrence said, a slight tremor in his voice betraying the emotion he fought to contain. I have done nothing wrong. In the distance, Lawrence saw the unmistakable uniforms of airport security approaching, hands resting near their weapons. A cold fear washed over him, the kind familiar to black men in America when authority figures approach with preconceived notions. Who would you trust to stand up for you in a moment of injustice? Comment number 1 if you believe bystanders should intervene when witnessing discrimination, or number 2 if you think it's safer to mind your own business. Like and subscribe if you've ever been in a situation where speaking up made all the difference. What would happen next to Lawrence Mitchell? Would anyone step forward to help him? Let's find out. Vanessa Torres had been scrolling through briefs on her tablet when the commotion caught her attention. As a young Latina attorney specializing in civil rights cases, she immediately recognized the dynamic unfolding at the gate. When she spotted Lawrence Mitchell, whose profile she just read in Business Insider last month, being surrounded by airline staff, she knew something was wrong. "This is definitely going on record," she muttered, activating her phone's camera and moving closer. The airline staff's body language, their positions forming a wall against a single, well-dressed black man, told her everything she needed to know. 3 rows back, William Parker shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The retired high school teacher had spent 30 years educating students about civil rights, about the importance of speaking up against injustice. Yet here he was, witnessing what appeared to be blatant discrimination, and his feet felt cemented to the floor. His wife squeezed his hand, her eyes urging him to do something, but fear kept him rooted in place. "They wouldn't treat him like that without reason," he whispered, immediately ashamed of the rationalization. Diana Chin observed the scene with growing outrage. As the senior vice president at a competing tech firm, she recognized Lawrence Mitchell immediately. They'd been on a panel together at a conference last year. More importantly, as an Asian American executive who flew first class weekly, Diana knew the protocols. This was not standard procedure. "Excuse me," she said, stepping forward decisively. Her Hermes scarf and Burberry coat signaled her own executive status. "That's Lawrence Mitchell of Mitchell Technologies. I can vouch for his identity, we've worked together." Charles barely glanced at Diana. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your place in line." "Actually, it does concern me," Diana persisted, her voice carrying across the gate area. "I'm witnessing what appears to be blatant discrimination against a fellow executive. Mr. Mitchell is exactly who he says he is." Inside the aircraft, the situation had become the sole topic of conversation in first class. Passengers pressed their faces against windows, watching the drama unfold. "What's happening out there?" asked an elderly man in 3C. "They're hassling some black guy trying to board first class," replied the businessman across the aisle. "Security's coming now." In the cockpit, Captain Gregory Harris was being briefed by another flight attendant. "Apparently there's some guy with a suspicious first-class ticket," she explained. "The gate agents think it might be fraudulent." "Wonderful," Harris sighed. "That's all we need is a delay." His 20 years with the airline had taught him to trust his crew's judgment, but something about this situation made him uneasy. "How suspicious are we talking here?" "Well, he's claiming to be some CEO, but..." Her voice trailed off. "But what?" Harris pressed. The flight attendant hesitated. "He doesn't look like our typical first-class passenger." Harris frowned, immediately understanding the subtext. "I'll be out in a minute." Meanwhile, social media was already amplifying the incident. Vanessa's live video had attracted hundreds of viewers in minutes, with comments flooding in, "Here we go again. Flying while black. Wait, isn't that Lawrence Mitchell from Mitchell Tech? Someone get this man's lawyer on the phone." Back at Mitchell Technologies headquarters in Silicon Valley, Lawrence's executive assistant Alicia received an urgent text from a colleague, "Check Twitter now. Boss is trending for all the wrong reasons." Alicia quickly pulled up the feed and gasped. There was her boss, surrounded by airline staff, with security approaching. The company's PR team instantly began mobilizing, but the damage was already spreading across platforms faster than they could track. Diana continued advocating loudly, her professional demeanor cracking under frustration. "This is absurd. I've witnessed white men board with nothing more than a quick scan of their boarding pass. Why is Mr. Mitchell being subjected to this level of scrutiny? Vanessa moved closer, her phone still recording. Sir, she called to Lawrence, I'm an attorney. Do you need assistance? The converging voices, the growing crowd, the approaching security, the situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. And standing at the center of it all, Lawrence Mitchell maintained his dignity while watching his worst fears materialize in real time. Would the witnesses make a difference? Or would their intervention only escalate an already volatile situation? The next few moments would determine not just whether Lawrence made his flight, but potentially the course of his career and the public perception of both him and his company. Security personnel arrived at Gate 37, for officers forming a semicircle around Lawrence. Their presence created an immediate hush among the onlookers, the gravity of the situation suddenly apparent to everyone. What seems to be the problem here? Asked the lead officer, a stocky man with a buzz cut who addressed his question to Charles rather than Lawrence. We have a passenger attempting to board first class with a ticket we believe may be fraudulent, Charles explained, his tone suggesting he was handling a serious security threat rather than a ticketing dispute. Lawrence felt his mouth go dry. Despite being the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, despite his tailored clothes and impeccable credentials, in this moment he was reduced to what America had always seen first, a black man perceived as being somewhere he didn't belong. Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here with me, one officer said to Lawrence, his hand hovering near his weapon. Lawrence complied immediately, hyper-aware of how quickly these situations could turn deadly. His mind flashed to headlines he'd read. Black man tackled in airport, black customer forcibly removed, black passenger handcuffed on tarmac. I have a valid first-class ticket, Lawrence said calmly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. This appears to be a misunderstanding. Sir, please keep your hands visible, another officer instructed when Lawrence attempted to reach for his phone again. Diana pushed forward, her professional demeanor returning. Officers, this is Lawrence Mitchell. He's the CEO of Mitchell Technologies, a Fortune 500 company. I can personally vouch for his identity. Vanessa, still recording, added, this entire incident appears to be based on racial profiling. Mr. Mitchell has shown his valid boarding pass multiple times. The security officers exchanged glances but maintained their positions. One placed his hand on Lawrence's shoulder, a gesture that sent a chill down Lawrence's spine. Suddenly, Lawrence's phone rang. The screen displayed Rebecca Wong, COO. His chief operating officer was likely calling about tomorrow's merger meeting. May I answer this? It's my COO calling about tomorrow's business meeting, Lawrence asked. Sir, please silence your phone, the officer responded. As Lawrence reached to decline the call, one officer moved forward abruptly. I said don't move. The situation teetered on the edge of physical confrontation when a new voice cut through the tension. What's going on out here? Captain Gregory Harris had emerged from the jet bridge, his uniform and authoritative presence creating an immediate shift in the dynamic. Captain, we have a situation with a passenger, Charles began. Harris surveyed the scene, security officers surrounding a well-dressed black man, a growing crowd of onlookers, multiple phones recording. And who is this passenger? Harris asked. He claims to be Lawrence Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Technologies, Charles replied, emphasis on claims. Harris stared at Lawrence for a long moment, recognition dawning on his face. Aren't you on the cover of this month's Business Leader magazine? Lawrence nodded, relief washing over him. Yes, that's correct. Harris turned to Charles. Why is Mr. Mitchell being detained? Charles faltered. We were verifying his boarding pass. It seemed unusual for him to have a first-class ticket. Unusual in what way? Harris pressed, his eyes narrowing. The silence that followed spoke volumes. No one was willing to articulate the obvious, Lawrence's race had been the unusual factor. Officers, thank you for responding, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding, Harris said firmly. Mr. Mitchell is a valid first-class passenger on my aircraft. The security team hesitated, looking to Charles for confirmation. Charles, now realizing his mistake but unwilling to admit it, simply nodded stiffly. Mr. Mitchell, we apologize for the confusion, one officer said, though his tone suggested otherwise. You're free to board. As the security personnel stepped back, Charles cleared his throat. We were simply following protocol for ticket verification. What protocol specifically targets CEOs? Diana asked pointedly. Charles ignored her, turning to Lawrence. You have to understand, sir, when something doesn't look right, we have to be cautious. The implication hung in the air, Lawrence didn't look right for first class. As Lawrence gathered his belongings, his phone rang again. This time it was Julian Westfield, CEO of the company they were merging with. Lawrence, are you on your way? There's buzz online about some incident at LAX. Lawrence took a deep breath. I'll explain when I arrive. There's been a situation. As he finally moved toward the jet bridge, Lawrence remembered his father's words from decades ago when he'd received his first executive job offer. Son, no matter how high you climb, there will always be those who believe you don't belong there. Your job isn't just to succeed, it's to succeed so overwhelmingly they can't ignore you. In that moment, as Lawrence walked past the airline staff who had humiliated him, past the security who had threatened him, and toward the first-class cabin he had every right to occupy, he made a silent promise to himself. This incident would not be swept under the rug. This would not be just another indignity to bear silently. This time, there would be consequences. Lawrence Mitchell stepped into the first-class cabin with every eye upon him. The buzz of whispered conversations fell silent as he moved down the aisle toward seat 2A. His $15,000 ticket, which moments ago had been treated as fraudulent, now granted him access to the luxurious pod by the window, though the experience had been irreparably tainted. He stored his briefcase, settled into his seat, and exhaled slowly, aware that his hands were still trembling slightly. 20 years of corporate success, building a technology empire from nothing, and still this was his reality. Flight attendant Melissa, the same one who had radioed for security, approached with a practiced smile. Mr. Mitchell, can I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Perhaps champagne? The sudden shift to excessive courtesy felt almost as insulting as the previous suspicion. Water, please, Lawrence replied, his voice deliberately neutral. Across the aisle, Diana Chen caught his eye and gave a small nod of solidarity before taking her own seat in 2C. 2 rows behind, Vanessa Torres settled in 4B, still occasionally glancing at her phone where she had been posting updates about the incident. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Diana said quietly when Melissa left. It was completely unacceptable. Lawrence nodded his thanks, but found himself unable to fully articulate a response. The professional mask he had worn for decades had slipped, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. In his mind, he wasn't just Lawrence Mitchell in that moment, he was every black person who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong in spaces they had earned the right to occupy. His phone vibrated continuously with notifications. A quick glance showed dozens of missed calls, hundreds of text messages, and thousands of social media alerts. The incident had gone viral with alarming speed. From his board chairman, "Are you okay?" Calling emergency meeting to discuss response. From his sister, "Just saw the video. Call me the moment you land." From the company's chief legal counsel, "Do not make any public statements until we speak." Lawrence opened his email and began drafting a message to his legal department. "I was just subjected to clear racial discrimination by airline at LAX. Multiple witnesses, video evidence. Need full team assembled when I land in New York. This will not be brushed aside." As he typed, Lawrence noticed a New York Times alert appear on his screen. Mitchell Technologies CEO allegedly profiled at LAX, stock dips 3% on viral video. The financial impact was already beginning. Lawrence's mind flashed to his thousands of employees, many of whom had stock options as part of their compensation. Their financial well-being was now being affected by this discrimination. "Mr. Mitchell." Lawrence looked up to see an older white passenger standing in the aisle beside him. "I just wanted to say, what happened back there wasn't right. I should have spoken up." Lawrence nodded. "Thank you for saying that." More passengers boarded, many doing double takes upon recognizing Lawrence from the gate incident or from his frequent media appearances. Some offered sympathetic smiles, others averted their eyes uncomfortably. As Lawrence continued assessing the growing crisis on his phone, he discovered something interesting. Edward Thompson, the CEO of the airline, was scheduled to attend tomorrow's merger meeting as a potential investor. The same man whose employees had just humiliated Lawrence would be sitting across from him at the negotiating table in less than 24 hours. Lawrence leaned back in his seat, his mind shifting from victim to strategist. His father had always told him, when they create obstacles, build doorways. Perhaps this incident, as painful as it was, could be transformed into leverage, not just for personal vindication, but for systemic change. "Mr. Mitchell, we're preparing for departure," Captain Harris said, suddenly appearing beside Lawrence's seat. "I wanted to personally apologize again for what happened. It was completely unacceptable." Lawrence studied the captain's face, sensing genuine regret. "I appreciate that, Captain Harris. But I'm curious, if you hadn't recognized me from a magazine, would I be on this flight right now?" Harris hesitated, discomfort evident in his expression. "I'd like to think so, but honestly, I don't know. And that's a problem." "Yes," Lawrence agreed quietly. "That's exactly the problem." As the plane began pushing back from the gate, Lawrence gazed out the window at the terminal where, just 30 minutes earlier, he had been treated as a criminal for attempting to use a ticket he had rightfully purchased. The humiliation still burned, but alongside it grew something else, determination. His phone chimed once more before he had to switch it to airplane mode. It was a text from his father, "Saw the news. Remember what I always told you, when they go low, you go high. And then you change the system." Lawrence turned off his phone, closed his eyes, and began formulating a plan that would transform this moment of personal indignity into meaningful change. By the time this plane landed in New York, he would be ready. Have you ever found yourself turning a negative experience into an opportunity? Comment number 1 if you believe in transforming obstacles into stepping stones, or number 2 if you think some injustices are too severe to reframe positively. Like and subscribe if you've ever witnessed how a single incident can spark widespread change. What strategy will Lawrence develop during this 5-hour flight? Will he seek vengeance or justice? Let's continue this remarkable journey. The Boeing 787 reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the first-class cabin settled into its usual rhythm. For the other passengers, the flight represented nothing more than a transition between destinations. For Lawrence Mitchell, it had become a suspended moment in time, 5 hours to process the trauma, assess the damage, and formulate a response that would shape not just his future but potentially impact corporate America's approach to racial bias. Lawrence opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his face in the dimmed cabin. He appeared focused and composed, the consummate professional. Only the slight tension in his jaw betrayed the emotional turmoil beneath the surface. As his fingers moved across the keyboard, Lawrence's mind drifted to another humiliation, 6 years earlier. He had just closed a $100 million acquisition when a security guard at his own company's celebration party had stopped him, asking for ID. Looking for the catering entrance, the guard had asked. Lawrence had laughed it off then, had told himself it wasn't worth making a scene. How many indignities had he silently absorbed over the years, telling himself they were the price of success? "Mr. Mitchell." Diana Chen had moved to the empty seat beside him during the brief moment the flight attendants were occupied in the galley. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said, her voice low. "My experience as an Asian woman executive is different, but I understand the constant need to prove you belong." What those airline employees did was textbook discrimination, and I'm willing to provide a statement if needed. Lawrence nodded gratefully. Thank you. That would be helpful. I've experienced my share of, "Where are you really from?" and assumptions that I'm the assistant rather than the boss, Diana continued. But I've never had security called on me for trying to use a ticket I purchased. The escalation you experienced was unconscionable. From across the aisle, Vanessa Torres leaned over. Mr. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me joining this conversation. The video I posted has over 3 million views already. People are outraged on your behalf. Lawrence felt a complex mix of emotions. Public support was valuable, but the incident being broadcast to millions carried its own weight. His most vulnerable moment was now entertainment for strangers. 3 million, he repeated. Corporate accounts for civil rights organizations are amplifying it, Vanessa explained. Your company's competitors are releasing statements about their commitment to diversity. This is becoming a watershed moment. Flight attendant Melissa approached their impromptu gathering, nervousness evident in her expression. Can I get any of you a refreshment? The conversation paused as they declined. When Melissa lingered awkwardly, Lawrence looked up at her questioningly. Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to say something. She glanced around to ensure no other crew members were within earshot. What happened at the gate was wrong. There was a message passed to the crew that someone might be trying to use a fraudulent first-class ticket. The description was. She hesitated. A black man in his 40s, Lawrence finished for her. Melissa nodded, her discomfort evident. I'm sorry I participated in that. I should have questioned it. Before Lawrence could respond, Captain Harris appeared in the aisle. Everything okay here? Yes, Captain, Melissa replied quickly, returning to her duties. Harris hesitated, then took the seat Melissa had vacated. Mr. Mitchell, I wonder if I might have a word with you in private? Diana and Vanessa tactfully returned to their seats, leaving Lawrence and the captain alone. I've been flying for this airline for 20 years, Harris began, his voice low. What I'm about to tell you could cost me my job, but after what happened, I feel you deserve to know. He glanced around before continuing. I checked the communications log. The alert about a suspicious passenger came directly from a manager who never even saw you. It was based solely on a gate agent's report that someone unexpected was attempting to board first class. Lawrence's expression remained neutral, but he discreetly activated the voice recorder on his phone beneath the cocktail napkin. The exact language used in the alert was demographic mismatch with ticket class, Harris continued. In 20 years, I've never seen that alert used for anyone who wasn't a person of color. That's valuable information, Captain, Lawrence said quietly. Thank you for your integrity in sharing it. After Harris returned to the cockpit, Lawrence sat motionless, processing this new information. Demographic mismatch. The clinical language of discrimination. 2 hours into the flight, Lawrence found himself engaged in conversation with several first-class passengers who had witnessed the incident. Their perspectives varied widely. It's not always about race, insisted an older gentleman in an expensive suit. They're just doing their jobs checking for fraud. When was the last time you were asked to verify your first-class ticket? Diana challenged him. The man fell silent. This isn't an isolated incident, Vanessa added. It's part of a pattern that many people of color experience daily, just usually without millions watching online. Lawrence's phone rang through the in-flight Wi-Fi, a call he couldn't ignore. Kenneth Blackwell, the most senior member of Mitchell Technologies' board of directors. Lawrence, are you all right? Kenneth's concern was evident. I'm fine, Kenneth. Handling it. The board is concerned about the publicity. Our stock dropped 5% in the last hour. Lawrence felt a flash of irritation. I was publicly humiliated for being black in first class, and the board's first concern is stock price. Kenneth sighed. You know that's not fair. We're concerned about you personally and about the 7,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on our stock performance. The PR team is suggesting we issue a statement that you're not pursuing action against the airline, that it was all a misunderstanding. It was not a misunderstanding, Lawrence interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. It was discrimination, plain and simple. And no statement will be issued without my approval. As Lawrence ended the call, he noticed a new email from a competitor airline's executive, disturbed by what we saw today. Would like to offer you lifetime first-class status with us. Call to discuss. Opportunities were emerging from the crisis, but Lawrence's mind was fixed on something larger than personal compensation. This incident had revealed not just individual bias but systemic issues that affected countless travelers who didn't have his resources or platform. With 2 hours remaining before landing, Lawrence began drafting not a lawsuit, but a comprehensive proposal. If Edward Thompson wanted to avoid a PR nightmare and potential legal action, he would need to commit to substantive changes in how his airline operated. By the time the captain announced their initial descent into JFK, Lawrence Mitchell had transformed from a victim of discrimination into an architect of potential industry-wide reform. The flight that began with humiliation was ending with purpose. The wheels of Flight 1857 touched down on the tarmac at JFK International Airport at precisely 7:43 p.m. Eastern Time. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, Lawrence Mitchell gazed out the window at the glittering New York skyline. Under normal circumstances, this view would have filled him with anticipation for tomorrow's merger meeting. Tonight, it simply reminded him of how quickly life could change course. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to John F. Kennedy International Airport, the flight attendant's voice announced over the intercom. Local time is 7:50 p.m. For your safety and the safety of those around you, please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until the captain turns off the fasten seatbelt sign. Lawrence barely registered the familiar spiel. His attention was focused on the notification that had just appeared on his phone, advisory, media presence at Terminal 4 arrival gate. Looks like you've got a welcoming committee, Diana said from across the aisle, showing him her own phone with a Twitter update about reporters gathering at JFK awaiting Lawrence's arrival. Mr. Mitchell, Captain Harris approached as passengers began collecting their belongings. I've arranged for ground staff to escort you through a private exit if you prefer to avoid the main terminal. Lawrence considered the offer. Part of him wanted to slip away quietly, to process everything that had happened without cameras and microphones thrust in his face. But another part, the part that had built a technology empire from nothing, recognized that visibility had power. Thank you, Captain, but that won't be necessary, Lawrence replied. I have nothing to hide. As first-class passengers were invited to disembark, Lawrence gathered his briefcase and nodded farewell to Diana and Vanessa, both of whom had offered their contact information and support. When he stepped into the jet bridge, he immediately noticed the airline representatives waiting anxiously at the gate. Mr. Mitchell, a woman in an airline executive uniform stepped forward. I'm Jennifer Ramirez, Vice President of Customer Experience. On behalf of the airline, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. Our CEO, Mr. Thompson, has requested a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. Lawrence regarded her calmly. I imagine he has. Unfortunately, my earliest convenience will be after tomorrow's merger meeting. Please let Mr. Thompson know I'll contact him directly. Jennifer's professional smile faltered slightly. Of course. We've arranged a private car to take you to your hotel. That won't be necessary. I have my own transportation arranged. As Lawrence entered the terminal, the flash of cameras confirmed what his phone had warned him about. Reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. Mr. Mitchell, how do you respond to the airline's claim that this was a procedural misunderstanding? Will you be filing a discrimination lawsuit? Has the airline offered you compensation? Lawrence raised a hand, and surprisingly, the chaotic noise subsided. I'll be making a statement tomorrow. For now, I'll simply say that what happened today is unfortunately not an isolated incident, but rather a reflection of biases that many travelers face daily. The only difference is that most don't have the platform I do to address it. With that, he moved through the crowd toward the exit where his car's service waited. The driver, a middle-aged black man named Jerome, recognized Lawrence immediately. "Mr. Mitchell," Jerome said, opening the door. "It's an honor to drive you, sir. I saw what happened at LAX. Been driving executives for 15 years, and I can't tell you how many times I've been mistaken for somebody's chauffeur when I'm just waiting for my wife in the arrival area." Lawrence nodded in understanding as he settled into the back seat. "It takes different forms, but the experience is universal. The difference is, you're in a position to do something about it," Jerome noted as he navigated through Queens toward Manhattan. "Most of us just have to swallow it and move on." Lawrence stared out the window, Jerome's words resonating deeply. The responsibility of his platform weighed on him. This wasn't just about one humiliating experience at an airport, it was about using that experience to create meaningful change. When they arrived at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, the staff had clearly been briefed about the situation. The general manager himself greeted Lawrence in the lobby. "Mr. Mitchell, we're honored to have you staying with us. We've upgraded you to our presidential suite, and security has been arranged to ensure your privacy." Lawrence thanked him and headed up to the suite, where he found his legal team already waiting. Susan Goldberg, the company's chief counsel, rose to greet him. "You've certainly had an eventful day," she said, her tone professional but concerned. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lawrence assured her, though "fine" hardly captured the complexity of his emotional state. "What's our position?" For the next 2 hours, Lawrence and his legal team discussed options ranging from a multi-million-dollar discrimination lawsuit to a quiet settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. The airline had already reached out 3 times with escalating offers to make this right. "They're scared," Susan observed. "The video has over 10 million views now. Their stock dropped 8% today." Lawrence paced the luxurious suite, thinking. "Edward Thompson will be at tomorrow's merger meeting." "Yes, as a potential investor in the merged entity," Susan confirmed. "This certainly complicates that dynamic." Lawrence stopped pacing, a strategy crystallizing in his mind. Actually, it might simplify it. As his legal team departed around midnight, Lawrence received a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was the CEO of a competing airline. "Lawrence, this is Richard Garrison from Atlantic Airways. I hope you don't mind the late call. I wanted to personally express my dismay at how you were treated today." "Thank you, Richard. We'd like to offer you lifetime diamond status with Atlantic. No strings attached. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone, and we want to show that not all airlines operate that way." Lawrence thanked him for the gesture but remained noncommittal. As valuable as the offer was, he was beginning to see a bigger picture, one where his personal experience could leverage industry-wide changes rather than personal perks. After ending the call, Lawrence stepped onto the suite's balcony overlooking Central Park. The city that never sleeps glowed beneath him, millions of lights representing millions of stories. How many of those stories involved the same kind of discrimination he had faced today? How many didn't have the cameras recording, the viral videos, the corporate position to demand change? Lawrence returned inside and opened his laptop. Instead of drafting a lawsuit or a public statement condemning the airline, he began outlining something very different. A comprehensive partnership proposal that would transform his humiliation into an opportunity for systemic change. By 3 a.m., as the city's pulse slowed to its quietest rhythm, Lawrence finally closed his laptop. Tomorrow's merger meeting had taken on an entirely new dimension. He was no longer just negotiating a business deal, he was architecting a response to injustice that could ripple through an entire industry. The conference room on the 40th floor of the Deutsche Bank building offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, though few of the executives gathered around the massive table were admiring the scenery. All eyes were fixed on Lawrence Mitchell as he calmly organized his presentation materials, the elephant in the room growing larger with each passing moment of silence. Lawrence wore his finest Tom Ford suit, a subtle armor for the battle ahead. Despite only 3 hours of sleep, he appeared refreshed and focused, the product of years navigating high-pressure situations. He noted Edward Thompson, the airline CEO, seated near the far end of the table, conspicuously avoiding eye contact. Julian Westfield, CEO of Horizon Innovations and Lawrence's merger partner, broke the uncomfortable silence. "I think we're all aware of yesterday's unfortunate incident. Lawrence, on behalf of everyone here, I want to express our support." Lawrence nodded acknowledgement. "Thank you, Julian, but let's focus on the business at hand. We can address yesterday's events afterward." For the next hour, Lawrence delivered a masterclass in compartmentalization, presenting the merger proposal with clarity and vision that impressed even those who had worked with him for years. He outlined how combining Mitchell Technologies' artificial intelligence capabilities with Horizon's hardware infrastructure would create an entity capable of dominating the market for decades. Not once did he reference the airport incident, though it hung in the air like an invisible current, charging every interaction. Edward Thompson shifted uncomfortably whenever Lawrence made eye contact with him. When the presentation concluded, Julian leaned forward, impressed. "This is even more compelling than our preliminary discussions suggested. I think we're aligned on the core valuation and integration strategy." The room hummed with positive energy as the merger, potentially the largest tech deal of the year, seemed within reach. As the group broke for coffee, Lawrence approached Thompson, who had been conspicuously quiet throughout the presentation. "Edward, could I have a word in private?" Thompson nodded stiffly, following Lawrence to a small adjacent meeting room. Once the door closed, Thompson immediately launched into damage control. "Lawrence, I want to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. It was inexcusable, and those responsible have been suspended pending investigation. Our legal team has prepared a settlement offer that I think you'll find more than generous." Lawrence studied the airline CEO, noting the beads of sweat on his forehead. Thompson wasn't concerned about justice, he was worried about liability and publicity. "I'm not interested in a settlement, Edward," Lawrence replied calmly. Thompson blinked in surprise. "Lawrence, be reasonable. The offer is 7 figures, with full confidentiality of course. This can all go away quietly." "That's precisely the problem," Lawrence said, his voice level but intense. "It goes away quietly until it happens to someone else, someone without my resources or platform. This isn't about money." Thompson's expression hardened slightly. "If you're planning a lawsuit, I'm not," Lawrence interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. "I'm proposing a partnership." Confusion replaced defensiveness as Thompson opened the folder. Inside was a comprehensive proposal titled, Mitchell Horizon Inclusive Travel Initiative. "What is this?" "Rather than adversaries in a lawsuit, I'm offering to make our companies partners in solving the underlying problem," Lawrence explained. "Mitchell Technologies will develop AI software that helps identify and eliminate bias in customer service interactions. Your airline will be the first to implement it, along with a comprehensive training program developed by diversity experts." Thompson frowned, scanning the document. "This would be expensive to implement." "More expensive than the lawsuit I could file. More expensive than the continuing stock price decline as this story remains in the news cycle." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "This isn't just about avoiding negative consequences, Edward. It's about transforming a potential crisis into industry leadership." Lawrence outlined the key components. Bias detection AI in customer service systems, comprehensive staff training, an industry consortium to share best practices, and scholarship programs for underrepresented groups in aviation and technology. "You turned me away from first class yesterday," Lawrence concluded. "Today, I'm offering you a first-class ticket to being part of the solution. The choice is yours." Thompson stared at the proposal, weighing his options. Gradually, his expression shifted from calculation to something resembling genuine consideration. "This is not what I expected. That's often the case when people make assumptions, Lawrence replied evenly. When they returned to the main conference room, the energy had shifted. Thompson approached Julian Westfield and the other merger stakeholders. Gentlemen, I believe Mitchell Horizon's first major client partnership has just been established, Thompson announced. Subject to working out the details, of course. The confusion on the faces around the table slowly transformed to understanding. Lawrence had somehow turned yesterday's humiliation into today's business opportunity. As the meeting progressed, the merger terms were finalized with an unexpected new element: the airline would become a key client of the newly formed company, implementing Lawrence's inclusive travel initiative across its global operations. When the executives broke for lunch, Julian pulled Lawrence aside. That was masterful. Most people would have gone for blood after what happened. Lawrence straightened his tie. My father taught me something valuable: when you're angry, they win twice, once in the original offense, and again when they make you lose control. True power is transforming obstacles into opportunities. By the time the meeting concluded at 4 p.m., Lawrence had not only secured the merger on favorable terms but had laid the groundwork for an industry-wide initiative that would outlast any lawsuit or settlement. The video poster had already reached out requesting an interview, which Lawrence had agreed to, not to rehash the humiliation, but to announce the new initiative. As the executives filed out of the conference room, Thompson lingered behind. I underestimated you, Lawrence, he admitted. I came here expecting threats and demands. That would have been easier for both of us, Lawrence acknowledged. Justice requires more imagination than revenge. Lawrence gathered his materials, reflecting on the 24 hours that had transformed a moment of deep injustice into a catalyst for change. The incident would never be erased: the humiliation, the fear, the painful reminder of biases that persisted despite his success. But in its place was growing something unexpected. A pathway to ensure fewer people would face what he had experienced. As he left the building, Lawrence's phone buzzed with a text from his father: saw the announcement of the initiative. This is how you change the game, son. Proud of you. 1 month later, Lawrence Mitchell stood in the same LAX terminal where he had been humiliated. The airline logos remained the same, the architecture unchanged, but nearly everything else about the experience had been transformed. Good afternoon, Mr. Mitchell, the gate agent greeted him warmly, scanning his boarding pass without a second glance. Thank you for your loyalty. We appreciate your business. No questions about verification. No suspicious looks. No calling for supervisors or security. Just the basic courtesy that should have been afforded to him, and everyone, from the beginning. Lawrence nodded and proceeded to the jet bridge, acutely aware of the changes implemented in the 30 days since the incident. New protocols had been established, staff had undergone training developed by Mitchell Technologies' newly formed Inclusive Experience Division, and subtle technological safeguards now helped identify potential bias in real time. As Lawrence settled into his first-class seat, he reflected on the whirlwind month. The viral video had ultimately garnered over 30 million views, sparking a national conversation about traveling while black and the indignities faced by people of color regardless of their status or success. Rather than fading into the background as another fleeting social media outrage, the incident had catalyzed genuine change. Largely because Lawrence had chosen a path of transformation rather than mere retribution. The New York Times business section had run a feature just yesterday: how one CEO's humiliation sparked an industry revolution. The article detailed how the Mitchell Horizon merger had been completed with record valuations, while the new company's first major client, the very airline that had discriminated against Lawrence, was now implementing cutting-edge bias detection and prevention systems. Mr. Mitchell? A flight attendant approached, interrupting his thoughts. The captain would like to speak with you when you have a moment. Lawrence followed her to the cockpit, where he found not Captain Harris from his previous flight, but Elaine Washington, one of the airline's few black female captains. Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you personally, Captain Washington said, extending her hand. I've been flying for this airline for 17 years, and the changes implemented since your incident have been more substantial than anything I've seen in my career. Lawrence smiled. I appreciate that, Captain. How are the new protocols being received by the staff? There was resistance initially, she admitted. Change is never easy. But the training modules your team developed have been remarkably effective. Especially the VR simulations that let employees experience bias from the receiving end. When Lawrence returned to his seat, he found an email from Diana Chen, who had witnessed and intervened during the original incident. She had accepted his offer to join Mitchell Horizon as the executive vice president of their new diversity initiative. Lawrence, her message read, 12 more airlines have signed on to implement our system. The consortium is growing faster than we projected. Vanessa Torres, the attorney who had recorded the viral video, had also found her path altered by that day's events. Her new legal practice specialized in transportation discrimination cases, with Mitchell Horizon providing technological support for her advocacy work. Even William Parker, the retired teacher who had remained silent during the incident, had contacted Lawrence weeks later. Prompted by guilt and a desire to make amends, he now volunteered teaching anti-racism workshops in his community. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready for departure, Captain Washington's voice came over the intercom. Our flying time to New York will be approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Lawrence gazed out at the California sunshine. The merger had exceeded all financial projections, with the stock price climbing steadily since the announcement of the Inclusive Travel Initiative. What could have been a devastating PR crisis had instead become a cornerstone of the new company's identity and mission. The lawsuit settlement money, for Lawrence had indeed filed and won a discrimination case, had been directed entirely to a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in technology and aviation. The first class of 50 scholars would begin their studies next fall. Perhaps most significantly, Lawrence had given a keynote address at the National Aviation Conference the previous week, standing alongside Edward Thompson. Together, they had announced industry-wide standards for bias prevention and customer service equity, standards that were already being adopted by transportation companies across the country. Sometimes transformation comes from our most painful moments, Lawrence had told the audience. The question isn't whether we'll face obstacles because of who we are, but how we'll transform those obstacles into opportunities for those who come after us. As the plane lifted off, Lawrence closed his laptop and allowed himself a moment of reflection. The humiliation he had experienced would never completely fade from memory. The fear he had felt seeing security approach, the indignity of being questioned in front of hundreds, the knowledge that his success and status had provided no shield against bias, these would remain with him. But alongside those memories now existed something powerful, the knowledge that his response had created ripples that would benefit countless travelers who would never know his name or story. People who would simply experience the basic dignity and respect that everyone deserved. Lawrence Mitchell had boarded a flight 1 month ago as a successful CEO and had found himself reduced to a stereotype. Today, he boarded as the architect of an initiative that was actively dismantling those stereotypes throughout an entire industry. The plane climbed higher, leaving the terminal where it had all begun far below. Lawrence watched the ground recede, knowing that sometimes the greatest ascent comes after the most painful fall. Lawrence Mitchell's journey teaches us that our response to discrimination can be more powerful than the discrimination itself. While racial bias remains deeply entrenched in society, strategic responses can create lasting change beyond individual vindication. True leadership means transforming personal humiliation into systemic improvement. Lawrence could have pursued purely punitive measures, but instead chose a path that addressed root causes. By developing bias detection technology and training programs, he ensured countless others would be spared similar experiences. His story demonstrates that effective change requires both accountability and innovation. The witnesses also teach us important lessons. Diana's immediate intervention shows how allies can make a crucial difference, while William's initial silence and later redemption reminds us it's never too late to stand against injustice. Vanessa's documentation highlights how technology can expose discrimination that once remained hidden. Perhaps most importantly, Lawrence's experience reveals how systemic racism persists regardless of achievement or status. No amount of success provides immunity from bias. Yet his response demonstrates that our greatest challenges can become platforms for our most meaningful contributions. Have you ever witnessed discrimination being transformed into positive change? Has an injustice in your life ever become the catalyst for something better? Comment below with your experiences and share this story if you believe in the power of transforming obstacles into opportunities. If you've ever experienced discrimination, how did you respond? Was your approach more focused on personal justice or systemic change? Comment justice if you believe holding individuals accountable is most important, or change if you think systemic transformation should be the priority. Like and subscribe for more powerful racism stories that highlight both challenges and triumphs. Your support helps us continue sharing these essential narratives that need to be heard. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Lawrence's powerful story. May we all find the courage to rise above our challenges and build a more inclusive world where such racism stories become relics of the past rather than daily realities.